Okay, we'll give it another minute or two and then we'll get started. Okay, I saw a couple other candidates join. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. We're going to get started in just a minute. Okay, if everybody's ready, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Ken Steffen, Sunnyvale City Manager. I'm going to give you an overview of what we're going to cover tonight. And then I briefly want to give each candidate a chance just to do a self-introduction so we know everyone that's on the call. So we do have a lot of material to cover tonight, and then we definitely want to take time to answer all of your questions as candidates. So we've asked each department director to provide an overview of department services, major initiatives that are underway, and we wanted to talk about something current, so how COVID-19 has affected operations. When we get to the presentation, I am going to ask the candidates to hold your questions until the end so we can get through it. And during that time, if you can stay on mute, I think we'll get better audio quality. And when we get to the end, we'll take time for questions and we'll kind of go round robin so everybody gets a chance. And we'll continue to go around to candidates until you're out of questions. So we'll stay as long as you want. Let's see. With that, why don't we go ahead? I'm going to call on each candidate just to do a quick self-introduction, and then the directors will introduce themselves when we start the presentation, when their segment comes up. So why don't I start with Leah? Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Leah Melman, present chair of vice chair of the Sunnyvale Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission, candidate for City Council representing District 6.
Thank you. Councilmember Melton.
Hello, everybody. My name is Russ Melton. I'm an incumbent Sunnyvale Council member for seat number 5. And with our transition to district elections, I'm running for re-election to City Council to represent District 4, Southeast Sunnyvale. Thank you, Kent, and all the directors for putting on this event tonight.
Thank you, Russ. Omar, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Omar Dean. I'm a lifelong Sunnyvale resident and former member of the city's Parks and Recreations Commission, and I am running for council in District 6.
Thank you. Hina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, this is Hina. I'm a Sunnyvale City Council District 2 candidate.
Welcome. Paul, would you like to introduce yourself? So you're muted, Paul. We can't hear you if you're hearing me on our end. Okay, well, Paul may have stepped away, so we're going to move on. This is a public meeting, and so we do have time here at the beginning before we get into the presentation to take public comment. So if there are members of the public that have joined and want to comment, we would ask that you raise your virtual hand. If you're on the telephone, you can use the raised hand feature, which is *9 on your telephone. And so if you indicate whether you want to make public comments at this time, please do so, and the city clerk will call on people who raise their hand. So City Clerk, is there any members of the public that wish to speak on the candidate orientation session?
No, Mr. City Manager, no members of the public have indicated a desire to speak on this topic.
Okay, then we can get started. Thank you for that. So let me start with before we get into the presentation, and it's okay, go ahead, David, you can leave that up. But I did want to introduce members of the city manager staff that are here tonight on the call with us that can help answer questions. So I get a lot of help tonight. We have Terry Silva, the assistant city manager, Jackie Guzman, our deputy city manager, Connie Versailles, assistant to the city manager, Michelle Zahari, who's a management analyst in the city manager's office, and David Carnahan, the city clerk, who I bet all of you know as candidates. So thank you all for being here. When we get into the Q&A, you may have to help me out. So with that, I would like to get into the presentation. And David, if you give me the next slide, I'll give you a brief overview of what we're going to cover. Okay, talk very briefly about city governance, the role of the city attorney and city manager, including an operational overview of COVID-19. For each city department, they're going to talk about key services, major initiatives that are underway, and current impacts of COVID-19 on services. Once we do have a lot of material, we are going to make this available to council candidates. And so we will make this presentation available so you don't have to take copious notes, you'll get a copy. And we will provide contact information at the end for the directors. If you do have follow-up questions after tonight, you can feel free to contact me or the department directors with questions you have about Sunnyvale operations. Next slide, please. Okay, the intro to Sunnyvale. Go ahead on the next one. So this is a list of things in the some of the many ways that City Council does set policy for the staff. And so again, as the City Council is our policy body, and they set the policy and framework, and there's many ways that can be done, all the way from the city charter to our annual budget. So each one of these different ways that the council might set policy has a little different process. There are council policies in a policy manual. Obviously, changing the city charter requires a vote of Sunnyvale voters. And so changes to the municipal code take a couple meetings. And so there's a little different process for each one of these. And so there's lots of ways that we do get guidance from the city council. Next slide. And of course, many of the policy issues do go first to boards and commissions, and many of you are board and commission members, so you know about this. But I wanted to highlight that there's two different types of commissions essentially. And while all commissions can act in an advisory capacity, there are commissions that are quasi-judicial, meaning they may hear appeals, but they do actually make decisions, and in some case binding decisions on the city, and there's not an avenue for appeal. Sometimes their decisions can be appealed to a higher authority like the city council. Sometimes they can't. So those are the commissions on the left. The advisory commissions really are advisors to the city council. They're not independent decision-making bodies, but they serve in an advisory capacity. And the responsibilities of the commissions in some cases are laid out in the city charter. So the charter established several of the commissions. Others have been established by ordinance. With that, I'm going to turn it over to John Nagel, our city attorney, to cover the basics about the attorney's office.
Good evening. My name is John Nagel, and as Ken said, I'm the city attorney. I've been here about 5 years, and I've done this several times. So this is, if you've ever attended Sunnyvale Leadership, you probably have already heard part of this presentation. So with that, can I have the next slide, please? So we're divided up into two types of services. The first is advisory services. The second is transactional services. And advisory services are provided to the city council, the various commissions and city departments. What we do is we represent and advise the city council and all city officers in matters that pertain to their office, and we attend meetings of the city council and the subordinate bodies, so that's the commissions, and we give advice when requested. One of the interesting things about a city, it's a municipal corporation, and that means that we have multiple clients, and that means that whoever is the ultimate decider of a decision will be my client in giving that legal advice. So that something in which the city council or the city charter has given ultimate authority to the city manager, then the city manager is my client, and my office provides legal advice to him. And of course, the city council, we provide legal advice as a body. We don't represent individual council members, but we represent the city council as a body. Sometimes that gets a little overlap when you get into conflicts of interest, because by helping council members sort out their individual conflicts of interest, it's helping the city council perform their function. So it's not quite totally black and white on that issue. And then our transactional services are what happens in any large corporation, with the exception of the first one, where we propose ordinance and resolutions and amendments to the city council or for their commissions. Next slide, David, please. We also, more similar to a corporate council, we prepare contracts, a development agreement, which is a type of contract that governs how people can use their property, deeds and other legal documents. We approve all forms of bonds that are given to the city to make sure that it adequately protects the city. We also represent the city in any litigation that's filed or any claims that are filed. Most obviously, the litigation goes to the city council, and the city council decides as a body, but it is possible that one of the quasi-judicial boards and commissions that makes decisions could end up being engaged in litigation. And then lastly, we provide advice to the risk manager regarding his, in this case, his or hers, assessing and settling of claims. And to file a lawsuit in California, a person first has to has to file a claim with the city, advise us of the nature of the harm that we allegedly caused, and allow the city to settle it prior to litigation. And then if we do deny the claim, that triggers amount of time that the person who filed the claim would then have a right to actually engage in litigation. Next slide, please, David. We also probably spend, I don't know what percentage, but we do spend a lot of time with the following government transparency and ethics law. The one that's probably you're most familiar with are the Brown Act, and that governs how the city council and the boards and commissions conduct their meetings so that the public is informed of what items are going to be considered and what days they're going to be considered on, and what time of that day, so that people can come and contribute and say, I support that, I don't like that, have you thought about this? As a subset of the Brown Act, we provide advice to closed sessions. This again primarily applies only to the city council. It allows myself and the city manager and any other necessary city employees to go into a closed session. The public is allowed to speak to the council prior to going in on the closed session and speak their mind on the issue. But the actual deliberations of the council get to be private and confidential. And we provide advice on that. And obviously, once certain things happen, the decisions that were made in closed session are then reported out to the public. And you'll see that every time we have a closed session listed on the agenda, you will see at the regular council meeting a item that's called report out, and that's a task that the vice mayor handles, where he or she reports out that, you know, we met in closed session on it could be a number of items: property negotiations, labor negotiations, litigation, if the city intends to sue somebody, and some other areas. We would then report out so that the public is then aware of what decision was made. And that's all. Our reporting out requirements are all set forth in the Brown Act, and we obviously comply with it. Public Records Act is something that you're probably aware that our records are public, but I don't know if you've ever made a Public Records Act or looked at it. But this is a very important aspect of the law that creates transparency, and one in which you will, if you are elected, will need to become familiar with. One important thing for city council members to realize is that there was a case filed against the city of San Jose, where it was determined that if you have communications about the city's business and you do it on a private electronic device, a cell phone, through email, fax, whatever means of communication, you would have a duty to disclose that upon request, so that when we get Public Records Act requests that impact the council, we're able to search all of their city emails and pull those records just on our own. But we always reach out to the city council, apprise them of the nature of the request, and we ask them that they search their records for any responsive records, and then they provide those records if there are any, or they let us know that there aren't. If there are records, we do the same review that we do with city records, and that is we review to see if there's any non-disclosure exemption that will allow us to not disclose the record to the member of the public. And then we then provide those records to that member of the public. The next area is something, of course, if you are elected, we also need to become familiar with, and you've already probably seen or received information about the Political Reform Act. And that's the most common, that's the statutory obligation. But there's also a common law conflict of interest. And lastly, there's what's called Government Code Section 1090, which affects the council's ability to take actions on a contract with an individual or body when an individual council member has a financial interest in that contract. Very draconian. If a council member has a financial interest in an entity who's bringing a contract in front of the council is not allowed to enter into that contract. And if they did inadvertently enter into that contract, the person who we've entered the contract into would have no rights to seek recovery. So they could provide services, and then it's found out there's a conflict under Government Code Section 1090, and they would have to give back any money that they've already received, and we would not have to pay them any other monies pursuant to the contract. And then lastly, we have the City Code of Ethics and Conduct, which is reviewed each year by the City Council. And it is set up to allow the public to know that city officers, both elected and appointed, will behave in a certain manner. And if you've ever looked at it, you'll see how it breaks out, how council members will interact with each other, with staff, other public agencies, the public, other commissioners. It goes through a series of subsections that address each one individually. And then it's also expected to be self-enforcing, which means that when council members make the determination that, or even a board or commission makes the determination that they violated the code of the ethics, they're expected to report it to the mayor. And then the mayor is authorized to do investigations and certain actions affecting board and commissioners. The mayor can take actions, and then with individual council members, the mayor does an investigation, but of course the council would act on any sanction, and it can range from a reprimand, censure, you lose seniority, you lose your committee assignments, you lose.
John, you froze on us. I don't know if I can't hear your audio, but is it just me?
Yeah, John, I don't know if you're able to still hear us. I'm not able to hear your audio.
Same here. No, nothing on audio.
John,
Hello,
you want to try
David?
turning your video off.
Yeah, John, we had a lot of trouble hearing you there for a minute. Would you mind
I
just cutting
apologize.
your
I don't
video?
know exactly when it started, but unfortunately, my home phone, when it rings, is a voice over internet protocol phone, and sometimes it interferes with my being in council meetings. So I apologize for that. So
John, you were talking about the Code of Ethics and Conduct when the audio stopped.
Okay, I will go back then. So the Code of Ethics and Conduct is reviewed and adopted by the City Council every year, and sets forth certain standards for both elected officials, council members, and appointed officials, board and commissioners, in the manner in which they will behave with not only each other, but staff members, individual members of the community, other public agencies, and sets forth the ethical behaviors that they're expected to comply with, so that the public will be able to know what they can expect from their interactions with both elected and appointed officials. The code is expected to be self-reporting, so that if an individual elected or appointed official makes a determination that they violated a code of ethics or conduct, that are reported to the mayor investigates, and then depending on the official, the mayor could impose sanctions in terms of boards and commissioners. Of course, only the council can remove a board or commissioner, so that would be something that the council acts upon. And then with the city council members themselves, there's a wide range. If a violation is determined to have occurred, a reprimand, a censure, lose seniority, lose committee assignments, both internal assignments as well as assignments to intergovernmental activities, and that would all be acted upon by the council. And next slide, David, I think. So at the council meetings, I serve as an advisory parliamentarian. The actual parliamentarian is the presiding officer, the mayor, or in the case of board and commissions would be the chair. And of course, if the vice chair or vice mayor are acting as the presiding officer, because the mayor or the chair isn't present, or there's a conflict, then that would go to the vice mayor or the vice chair. We also provide advice as to what hearings are public. Now, in Sunnyvale, we call all of our general business public hearings, but there are certain items that are actually required by law to be a public hearing, and we're required to give notice. And you're probably most familiar with that in terms of a land use decision, where we'll mail out notice to the neighborhood, around a project. So people will be advised if they want to come and speak. And we make sure that those notices are done and we're complying with all the requirements of state law. And then I talked a little bit about the city attorney's role in closed session earlier, but that's the opportunity for us to go in on a number of items. The most common ones obviously are labor negotiations, litigation, and real property negotiations, where we're either going to enter into a lease, either where we're the lessor or the lessee, or we're buying a piece of property or selling a piece of property. We go in and we provide advice along with the city manager and other city employees who are necessary to be there to give advice to the council. And then we give advice to the council about what needs to be reported out and when it needs to be reported out. And I think that's my last slide, if my memory is correct, David. So, but you can go to the next slide. Yep. And
All right,
very
thanks,
nice to
Ron.
meet you all. And I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to meet. Well, some I've already met, but I'm sure we'll meet sometime again. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to give a very high level overview of the role of the city manager in the city manager's office. Next slide, please. So some of my responsibilities are spelled out in the city charter. I do serve as the head of the administrative branch of city government. And so day-to-day operations of all the departments, I manage. All the department directors report to me. The exception is the city attorney, who reports directly to city council. I'm responsible for short and long-term planning and supporting policies that the city council adopts. I'm also the primary point of contact for council members for routine requests for support. Next slide, please. So the charter has some very specific things that it says that I must do. And this is there's some paraphrasing here, but this is most of them. And so appointing staff, with the exception of the city attorney and the city attorney's staff, does fall under my responsibility. And so the city council appoints the city manager and city attorney. And then other than the city attorney's staff, that responsibility falls to me, and I work with the department directors on that. I am required to prepare an annual recommended budget, and Tim Kirby is going to talk more about what some of the charter requirements are for the budget. So there's some parameters that are spelled out. I'm responsible for the day-to-day administration of the budget once it's adopted, so making sure that we do our best to stay on budget. I do work with other staff, council meeting agenda planning and logistics. I do work closely with the mayor on that. So the mayor also reviews agendas, and we go over different items as we're building the agendas. And then other duties is assigned. That's a big one. Next slide, please. So I guess if I had to estimate, I do spend probably 10 to 20% of my time on policy development, managing council meetings, but probably 80–90% of my time is spent on day-to-day operations and service delivery, meaning working with directors, with customers, with businesses on different issues that come up around the city. And so what you might see at a city council meeting is what you see above the water, that part of the iceberg, but there's a lot more beneath the surface. And I think you're going to get a little feel for that tonight when you see all the stuff that's going on in different departments. Next slide. So just a few facts. Our 2021 operating budget is $302 million. Our 20-year capital budget is over $2 billion. We have a lot of very large infrastructure projects underway right now. You'll hear more about those. In terms of total full-time employees, we have 936. When you throw in part-time employees and casual staff, that number goes to about 1,300. Sunnyvale has a very diverse base of businesses. So there's more than 7,000 employers in Sunnyvale that employ more than 80,000 workers. 85% of those businesses employ less than 5 people. So we do have a lot of small businesses in Sunnyvale. Next slide. So some of the key services in the city manager's office that we provide, we do support development of city council policies, and we do that through things, like managing the study issues process. We also help organize and manage the council's annual strategic planning session. We do administer legislative and elections through the city clerk. So the city clerk is our elections officer. We do provide support to local businesses. Our Office of Economic Development, headed by Connie Versailles, is in the city manager's office. We also handle citywide communications. And so things such as the oversight and day-to-day management of the website is in the city manager's office, as well as producing various publications that are done citywide. Next slide. One of the things we've continued to work on, especially in the last couple of years, is major community outreach projects, and Sunnyvale Unity is one that's continuing. And so large community outreach initiatives, of course, we took the lead in outreach for district-based voting, and that went to voters. Now we're really transitioning to talk about racial equity and other issues around police issues that the community has concerns about. Just wanted to let you know, we do have a council study session on October 13th to talk about public safety policies and practices. I think that's going to be really interesting, so you may want to tune into that. Next slide. We also do actual real projects. So this is a capital improvement project to install an airplane noise monitoring system. So this is close to being implemented on the ground. We're going to install 4 permanent noise monitors, and then there's a public website that'll track all of the airplane flights. So there'll be a public record and a searchable database that measures the noise and then identifies what aircraft that is, where its destination is, and it'll actually record the noise, and we'll get that. So we'll know how many flights a day, what time of day, how that changes during different times of years and over several years. So we hope that that's going to really provide a good historic baseline for airplane noise levels into the future. And it'll help us as we deal with the FAA and just try to limit airplane noise in the city of Sunnyvale that we've heard from a lot of residents about. Next. So the city manager's office is also taking the lead on several very significant technology initiatives. The biggest one that we have right now citywide is the ERP, or Enterprise Resource Planning System. This includes a bunch of different systems we have now that will be rolled into a larger system. So it includes all of our finances, human resources, payroll, it's purchasing, accounts payable, receivable. There's a bunch of elements that we're replacing in this database. Literally every employee will use it because they'll fill out their time cards on it. Terry Silva, our assistant city manager, is the sponsor for this project. And you'll see this come up on a number of different departments, initiatives, because there's a lot of people working on it right now. We're getting close to the first rollout, which we expect by the end of the year, for the financial and purchasing system. Another project we're just getting started on is electronic records management. And while a lot of our records are already stored in databases, we are trying to look at the records that we still have in a paper format that are in file cabinets all over the place and convert those to an electronic system so that they're easier to retrieve, take less space. And in the future, we can just create things electronically and not have to print and distribute paper. Another thing we managed during COVID is just the conversion of council meetings to electronic format. So implementing things like Zoom and MS Teams for our public meetings was spearheaded by the city clerk's office. Next slide, please. So COVID-19, this has taken up a lot of our focus over the last 6 months, obviously. Early in the process, when the pandemic became apparent, we did activate our Emergency Operations Center, and it's been activated continuously since that time. There's a staff that's organized around emergency operations. We do regular communications with that group to make sure we're staying on top of things. Some of the significant actions, again, that were led by the city manager's office. We created the Sunnyvale's Care Program. This was created from scratch. It didn't exist before COVID. And we did identify funding $600,000 for small businesses, $150,000 in grants for nonprofits that we put together, and then sought out corporate donations to match that funding, which it was. We also made 2 major grants to Sunnyvale Community Services that helps with food, financial assistance, rental assistance for our population in Sunnyvale in need. And so they've gotten 2 large grants, $250,000, and then another one for $690,000. And we're continuing to look today at how we can continue to support their efforts. The City Council adopted a moratorium on residential evictions. We also, when Sunnyvale Community Services, when the pandemic first hit, they depend a lot on volunteers. And initially, that volunteer base pretty much dried up. They have a lot of senior citizens that help. And when COVID first hit, the advice was stay home, do not go out. And so they lost their volunteer base. City staff stepped in. So we, as essential workers, were able to provide support, whether it was fielding phone calls from people in need, and even bilingual support around that, to bagging groceries, to distributing groceries, to delivering food. City staff stepped in and filled that gap when the volunteers couldn't meet it. Since then, over time, their volunteers have come back. We also partnered with the Sunnyvale Downtown Association to temporarily close Murphy Avenue so we could allow outdoor dining, and then recently approved an emergency order that would allow a number of different outdoor businesses to operate on sidewalks anywhere in Sunnyvale. And so we're going to, I think, continue to see that for a while. That ends my part of the presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Trudy Ryan, our Community Development Director.
Okay, thank you. Just setting my clock for myself so I can see how I'm doing. Next slide, please, David. Thank you. Community Development Department is essentially 3 divisions: planning, building, and housing. Planning, as the name suggests, looks at sort of the future. What kind of policies do we want to have in terms of land use? How are we managing mandates that are handed down from the state that talk about what we need to do in terms of having a general plan? What are our general our area plans? What is it we want the future to be like in the community? And that's sort of a very different process and perspective that we can bring to the community. It's really forward looking, but it's very much informed by what's happening today and our partnership with other departments. I would say our policy planning section will collaborate with other departments more so than there are other services, just because we want to make sure that when we put a plan together that we have the physical and the budget support, the supportive services that might be associated with some change in land use. Very much land use focused, but it affects the way we can deliver services. The second component of planning is zoning. And that's maybe more familiar to a lot of people. That's basically, how can you use your property? How big can something be? What kind of uses can you put in the building? If you're from the north part of the San Francisco Bay Area, your image may be, oh yeah, Sunnyvale, that's like some suburban community somewhere down in the South Bay. While we do have a lot of land that's devoted to residential uses and a lot of single family, we probably have a lot more variety than a lot of other communities in the Bay Area. And that affects the zoning and land use that we have, that we prepare in the policy planning stage, that just gets implemented, if you will, during the zoning stage. It could be something as simple as a business license application and a planner checking to make sure that's a use that's allowed in that zoning district, to something more complicated where someone is requesting a change to the allowable land uses on their property, or they have a very, very large development proposal. Both of those items will be reviewed by Planning Commission if they're big enough, if you will. Many items will happen just as a staff level. So that's kind of the before something happens on the property. The during something happening, that's our building division. The building division reviews development plans to assure that they're consistent with the state building codes. There's also a smaller element of our local amendments to the building codes, and on a later slide, I'll talk about that a little bit more. But that's what you see out there in the community is the building that's going on. You don't necessarily see the plan checking that's happening. Our third division is the housing division, and that's kind of the before, during, and after. Some of the programs that Kent talked about, Sunnyvale Community Services and the funding that we've provided them, we have worked to provide federal funds that we have available, our Community Development Block Grant, our CDBG, our local sources of funding through our housing mitigation funds, the provision of human services, and providing support to different agencies, not just Sunnyvale Community Services, that provide an array of services to our members of our community that have different needs. We do have 4 commissions. The Planning Commission meets typically twice a month, and they have the biggest agenda, the most reading. So if you're not a reader, you wouldn't want to be on the Planning Commission. The Heritage Preservation Commission is another, the Planning Commission is a charter commission. Heritage Preservation is also a charter commission, and they have responsibility for promoting and preserving and recommending to the council on the preservation of heritage resources in the community. And they do have decision-making authority about changes to properties that have been designated. Housing and Human Services Commission is primarily advisory to the council on items. They do have a few actions that they take that are unique to the Housing and Human Services Commission, and more direction for staff on how to prepare for the next step of something that's going to come to the City Council. Our Board of Building Code Appeals never meets, kind of, sort of. We are required to have a board to handle appeals. If someone is aggrieved with the determination that's made by our chief building official, they can take that to the Board of Building Code Appeals. Anything from an interpretation to the code, or even if there's an enforcement activity, they have that opportunity. I think the really good news is that we've been able to usually work out issues so that the board has rarely met. I've been here a very long time, and I think they might have had one meeting scheduled that was canceled because the item was completed. So the next slides will go a little more quickly. This talks about the area plans. There's 4 largest of our area plans that are on the map. In 2016, the council adopted the Peary Park specific plan. Most of the development capacity of that has already been captured. There are a couple of projects that are remaining. When the council adopted it, they gave authority for studying residential uses on a couple of sites. We don't have the capacity to address those right now, but there is some pent-up interest in examining other aspects of that plan. We just completed the downtown specific plan amendments, which enabled a little more office and a little more housing, and then brought our development standards more in compliance with state law. Lawrence Station, you're likely to see in January. That's a plan that was adopted in 2016, and immediately the council said, yeah, but we would like you to study the possibility of more housing in the area. So primarily what we're looking at is more housing and some planning elements to make the area sort of read and feel like a district. El Camino Real, we have a plan. This one has taken a little longer. It's been thwarted a little bit, if you will, by changes in state law that have taken away our discretion on a number of items. So we want to be very thoughtful and careful to get a plan that works for Sunnyvale, and are working with developers to ask them to work with us to get that plan in shape. And then the Moffett Park plan is the largest plan, and will be coming back to the council next week on a study session on a new path on our community outreach and council information associated with that. Next slide, please. Major initiatives underway right now. We do have several 100% affordable housing projects. The downtown block 15 is property owned by the city of Sunnyvale. Sonora Court is property that we purchased from the Mid-Penn Housing as part of a opportunity to provide them money. We are more control, and we can assure that an affordable housing project goes there if we had ownership. And then Orchard Gardens, that's in more formative phase. That's an existing affordable site that wants to increase the number of housing units on there. The Sonora Court, in case you don't know the geography, is at the Lawrence Station area. Very busy responding to and tracking state legislation. And we will be starting on our housing element update next year. That's part of responding to state legislation. The housing strategy is coming to council in October, and there'll be many policies associated with that we can fold into our housing element update. Next slide, please. Reach codes also going to council in October. That's part of the city's green initiatives, comes out of the climate action playbook. And I'm sure Romano will talk about that a little bit in his presentation. We have 2 state grants that were non-competitive grants that we were able to I think in total, we're like $500,000 available to help us with some of our initiatives, and most of it we're using so that we can comply with some of the more recent state legislation that kind of dictates how we have to manage our land use. We're also working on an update to the noise and air quality elements of the general plan, which includes a component of environmental justice. And then really large is the permit system replacement. And you can see I've listed all of the initials of the departments that are big players in that effort. And then lastly, next slide. This is our work in progress. So it tells you how much development is happening. I give you both the net and the gross. In the industrial areas, the difference between net and gross is really big because some of the net is from residential sites that were formerly industrial sites. We haven't seen a lot of slowdown in construction. We were pretty busy before the COVID hit. A little bit of a slowdown because of the shelter-in-place regulations, but that's come back up. And it's just phenomenal, the number of hotels that are in the pipeline. At one point we had 14, I think it's down to 12 because a couple of them have completed, but then other ones came in. And many cities would just be insanely jealous to have that many hotels interested in locating in their community. And then one more slide. What have been the impacts? Well, we couldn't offer our state-of-the-art over-the-counter plan checking services that we used to have. We had to switch very quickly to doing virtual services. Many of the staff in building and planning were able to have their city phone number put onto their various devices, so someone could still call the same number they were used to calling and reach the planners that they were used to reaching. A lot of more meetings and outreach are offered online. We went to only electronic submittals. I say only, almost only electronic submittals for both building and planning plan checks. That was a huge effort to transition. However, we're doing it. Building inspections continued, as I mentioned. Our inspectors get checked very often when they go into a site. They're not required to report to us when there are any issues, but I think our development community is very respectful and they do let us know if there's been a problem. And then Kent already mentioned some of the things that we've been working on with our housing division. And then, of course, we had to delay some of our studies, but we're trying to get back into the swing of things. And now I'll turn it over to Romana.
Thank you, Trudy. Good evening, everyone. Next slide, David. I'm going to just start off with just telling you some of the key services that environmental services our department provides. We provide great tasting water to all of Sunnyvale. We have a very good portfolio of water supply sources. We get water from SFPUC and Valley Water. We also have our own wells, and we also produce recycled water. So one of our key areas that we work on is to make sure that we are able to supply water to meet all our current needs, but also to take care of future demand. You've heard Trudy mention all the different specific plans and area plans, and all that involves growth, and that growth requires water. So our goal is to make sure that we have adequate water supplies to meet the demand. We are also tasked with implementing the water conservation mandates from the state. As you know, California is a state that goes through periods of good water, and then you have droughts. So we want to make sure that we are conserving water, we're not wasting water. So we're doing great in that regard. We have reduced our water consumption per capita more than 30% over the last 20 years. In addition to that, in addition to the water supply, we also collect the wastewater from all our customers, and through a network of close to over 300 miles of pipelines, convey that the wastewater to our wastewater treatment plant for treatment. We have a sewer call truck service that we maintain 24/7/365. And our goal is to make sure that we respond to all our requests, sewer service requests. We get a lot of them every year within 2 hours. In addition to water and sewer operations, we also maintain a network of close to 330 miles of storm pipes. And the goal of that system is to make sure that we collect all the storm water because of due rain events or flooding events, and then we safely transport that water into the bay. Next slide, please, David. Another key service is we also operate and maintain the wastewater treatment plant. If you've ever been close to Caribbean Drive and Borregas, you have probably seen some hills, and right behind the hills, between the hills and the bay, is the wastewater treatment plant. It also operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. We treat about 13 million gallons per day of wastewater. Once the wastewater is treated through a series of steps, we're able to discharge it into the bay. And as you can imagine, this is a highly regulated industry. We have to make sure that we are complying with state and federal regulations. And I'm happy to report that we meet all discharge requirements. In addition to the wastewater that we discharge to the bay, some of the wastewater can be converted to recycled water. So we have the capability of producing up to 800,000 gallons of wastewater, recycled water per day. And this can be used for irrigation. It can also be used for indoor plumbing. For example, the Apple campus actually uses our recycled water through a joint arrangement with Valley Water and the city of Cupertino. And we supply this recycled water to them, and they use it for their irrigation and their indoor plumbing. We also, just like water supply, we also are in charge of planning to ensure that we have sufficient treatment capacity at the plant to accommodate future demand. Next slide, please, David. Another key service that environmental services is responsible for is sustainability. So we are tasked with implementing the strategies in the climate action playbook, which basically is a blueprint to reduce the carbon footprint for Sunnyvale. We also have a regional stormwater permit under the auspices of the water board that we're required to follow. And that basically involves stormwater pollution prevention measures, and environmental services is tasked with doing that also. We have a full service lab that does more than 50,000 sampling and analysis or testing every year. all with respect to water, or drinking water, wastewater, and also stormwater. We also have a compliance team that makes sure that we comply with all regulations, federal and state, as it relates to wastewater and stormwater and drinking water. We also have compliance inspectors that go out and make sure that they inspect several facilities in Sunnyvale that have their own special wastewater discharge permits. And we also inspect several businesses that may generate stormwater related pollution. And we make sure that they're following state and federal regulations. Next slide. Another key service is solid waste collection, process, and disposal. You're probably familiar with the Smart Station in the north part of town, again on Caribbean at Borregas. And the Smart Station basically takes the material that's collected, solid waste material that's collected, we process it, and then we transfer it to either basically the landfill, or we dispose of. You see the graphic on the right side is actually material that we can recycle and actually get revenue for it. We're also tasked with implementing the City Council's Zero Waste Program initiative, which aims at reducing the amount of waste that we send to the landfill. Our goal is to get to an 80% diversion rate. That means we're diverting 80% of the waste that's going to the landfill by 2030. And last, we also operate and maintain the closed Sunnyvale landfill. These are the series of hills that you see at Caribbean and Borregas. There's these landfill, even though it's closed, it generates methane, and we capture the gas safely and then use it to generate electricity that's used by the wastewater treatment plant. Next slide. Some major initiatives that environmental services is involved in. We have a computerized citywide sewer and water model that allows us to kind of capture what's happening in our wastewater, our water distribution system and our wastewater collection system, and gives us a glimpse of how it operates and allows us to operate the systems more efficiently. We also support the water capital budget and the wastewater capital budget. These budgets basically allow us to replace and rehab our water distribution system, our wastewater collection system. These are the series of the network of pipes that transport the water and wastewater. Public Works is the department that basically manages these projects, but our department supports these functions and provides technical expertise on these projects. We also do other projects that allow us to use technology to operate these systems more efficiently. And lastly, we also support the growth that's happening in the city. Everyone needs water and wastewater services. So it's our job to make sure that we are able to work with them to provide those connections and the capacity for both water and wastewater. Next slide. We also support the rebuilding of the wastewater treatment plant. The plant is more than 50 years old, and we have a special program called the Clean Water Program, the largest project in the history of Sunnyvale. Again, we work with Public Works, and Chip is going to talk a little bit more about this. But we ensure that we're basically supporting Public Works in the implementation of this program. And we also ensure that the plant is still operating while we're doing all this construction on the site. As I mentioned, because of aging infrastructure, we also need to make sure that the plant is operating. So any plant breakdowns, we attend to those. We have 440 acres of oxidation ponds next to the plant, which are part of the treatment process. And they have levees that surround these ponds. And we want to make sure that those ponds are operating safely. So we have levee project repairs that are associated with that we are undertaking right now. And we also have a food to energy conversion project that we're also undertaking. Next slide. On the sustainability end, we are again tasked with implementing the climate action playbook. So the 6 strategies that you see on the side on the right side are the strategies that we use to get to our goal of carbon neutrality by 2050, which is an 80% reduction in our carbon footprint by 2050 as compared to 1990 levels. As you can see, we're about 28% as far as in 2018. Our goal, intermediate goal, is to get to a 56% reduction by 2030. Next slide. On the solid waste side, we are rebuilding the smart station. It's more than 30 years old, and we'll be taking part. We're trying to bring it up to code and also meet several new regulations. We're also working with other cities that are actually partners right now with in the smart station on renewing those partnerships or forming new partnerships. We are working on a new collection franchise agreement. And then lastly, we are, the state has passed new regulations via Senate Bill 1383 that mandate us to reduce our organics. So we're working on implementing those mandates. Next slide. So the last slide focuses on our impact on our services that we provide because of COVID-19. Fortunately, we've been able to provide a majority of our services with little or no impact to all our residents and customers. We have most of our staff on site, and we've made sure that they are able to work safely by implementing several safety precautions. There has been some impact on our community engagement and outreach as it relates to sustainability, zero waste, and stormwater pollution prevention. There's been some reduction in our solid waste tonnage collection, primarily because of the closure of many offices and also the reduction in demand because of closure of restaurants. But overall, we've been able to provide most of the services to our residents and customers. So that concludes my presentation. I'm going to hand it over to Chair. I'm sorry, Tim.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Tim Kirby. I'm the Director of Finance. I've been the director since 2016. Prior to that, I was the Assistant Director and then held several other roles with the city. I'm going to go through my department relatively quickly, and then I'm going to get into a quick budget overview. So we have 6 divisions in finance. We do citywide financial management. We do budget. We prepare the annual budget with the city manager's office and all the departments. We have centralized purchasing, so we buy everything and issue all the contracts for the city for goods and services and construction projects. We do all the accounting and financial reporting. We do all the revenue collection. And then we have a forward-facing utility billing, cashiering, and business license where we speak with about 30,000 Sunnyvale customers, businesses, and residents a year for water, sewer, and solid waste and recycling services. Next slide, please. Major initiatives. Kent already mentioned the ERP implementation. My department is very heavily impacted by this. It's a big project for us. We are currently entering a project's budget cycle, and I'll describe what that means in a little bit. We have four major fee studies going underway this year. We have a water rate study. Looks like we're looking at doing a solid waste rate study that hasn't quite started. We're doing what's called a public facilities impact fee study. That's a development related fee. And then we're looking at all development fees separately. So the public facilities one is a new fee. The other study is to look at all existing fees. We have several major financings going on. We just start wrapping up one for the Sunnyvale Clean Water Program. That was $221 million. And then we're working on one for the Civic Center coming up here shortly to pay for part of the Civic Center. We are doing quarterly budget updates in response to COVID. Our first one is coming up in October. And we're also doing cost recovery for COVID under the CARES Act and with any FEMA money we can get back for the emergency. Next slide, please. Service delivery impacts to finance were manageable. We are an administrative department largely. I do have some field employees that read meters, but overall, we were able to manage it and maintain service levels. We did some proactive things in concert with council and the city manager's office. We held penalties on utility bills. We stopped interrupting service for non-payment. We're still in that status today. We deferred transient occupancy tax, that's a hotel tax, for 9 hotels to help with their cash flow and help them get through COVID. A good chunk of my department is working from home still, at least part-time, although my utility staff, because they are customer facing, are back in the office full-time after initial partial service reduction. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go into a very high and very quick overview of the Sunnyvale budget, the 2021 budget. We spend in May a whole day with council going over this budget, and that still probably scratches the surface of the document. But I'll get through this at a high level, and then you know, you can always, I always encourage people to, you know, watch the exciting budget workshop. It's recorded. So you can always do that too to get more detail. We do a 2-year budget. So what that means is we alternate. So earlier I said we're entering a projects budget year. What we do is we alternate between operating and projects. So we take a hard look at operating, develop a 2-year budget, and then we take a hard look at projects. We do a 20-year budget for projects. We look at it every 2 years. And we do 20-year financial plans for all of our major funds. You can think of funds like buckets of money. The major fund types, we have about 50 so odd funds. The major fund types are the general fund, which is our largest and most traditional, you know, all the tax dollars go there. That's where we fund all our public safety, you know, traditional services, public safety, library, parks, sidewalks, etc. Enterprise funds are what Romana was just, an example is what Romana just spoke about. So water, wastewater, and solid waste and recycling are all enterprise funds. Those are business-like activities where they're fully supported by the revenues that are billed out to customers who use the services. Special revenue funds are funds that are developed to capture restricted revenues, legally restricted revenues, where we can only spend them on very specific purposes and that we have to do special reporting on. And then internal service funds are funds that capture services that are provided back to all the departments. An example of that, those are, a good one is information technology services, where they support the whole city internally. And like I said, we do 20-year financial plans for each of these. Next slide, please. We have a strong legal framework and a strong set of community values around budget development. We have a 10-year balanced budget mandate. It's in the city charter. The city charter also requires that we deliver a budget by June 30th of each year and that we hold a public hearing on that budget. We do typically deliver the recommended budget early in May. We have a 20-year resource allocation plan and a 20-year balancing requirement with council policy. So that's a mandate placed on us by the city council and a good practice. And then just an example, we carry a lot of reserves. The most common one we talk about is the budget stabilization fund and the general fund. And we have policies around those reserves. In this case, we have to maintain 15% of revenues in the first 2 years of our financial plan in the general fund budget stabilization fund. No, go ahead, David. Thank you. Economic context, we were, you know, all the way almost through to developing our budget in March, and we had to put the brakes on and change everything from there on forward. Shelter in place orders, you know, change it, non-essentials businesses closed. Our revenues declined steeply and almost immediately. There was a lot of uncertainty and still is. And we're seeing a lot of volatility in the economy. So we really had to pivot. But overall, our revenues were declining or moderating. Next slide, please. So we significantly moderated our projections. You have got steep drops in the estimates for sales and transient occupancy taxes. We moderated service and impact fees, and then long-term growth and midterm growth in property tax revenue. Next slide, please. So here's a graphic picture. Actually, Kent developed this slide for the budget workshop, and I've come to really like it because it says it nice and easily. The 1920 adopted budget, there's the general fund revenues. 2021, you can see the difference, especially if you look at the FY 2021 number, went from 200 million to under 185 million. Next slide. So we also did expenditure reductions, combination of one-time and ongoing reductions, totaling 26.6 million, one-time and 122 million over 22 years or 20 years. Don't worry, I'm not adding any years to the financial plan. Froze almost 30 vacant positions, including 5 public safety officer positions. Did things like cut 50% of our budget for casuals, reduced travel and training, goods and services, and then took a couple actions to defer a little bit of work, sidewalk and concrete work. Next slide. So this is what our general fund budget stabilization fund looked without our reductions. After we put those revenue drops in place, if we had just gone with just the revenue and stayed with the current expenditure level, we would have dropped below zero and started going negative by fiscal year 23-24. And with that 10-year balanced budget mandate, we can't do that. So it wouldn't be a good practice to do that anyway, but we also can't do it legally. So next slide. So here's what the budget stabilization fund looked like with the reductions. So you can see here, it still drops to a low point. That low point's about $12 million, $12.5 million. I'm sorry, $9.8 million. And climbs back up from there. Next slide. Here's an idea of where the funding sources look like. These are all our different funds that have revenue. That's on the left. I won't go over this in detail, but it gives you an idea of where we spend our money and how our money is spent by fund. So you can see the enterprise funds, the utilities in there, golf and tennis, the general fund, and then we're making contributions to reserves. I will note that most of those contributions, or almost all of them, are related to restricted revenues that are for capital, like park impact fees. Next slide. It's organized into 2 volumes. If you're going to read anything in the budget, read the city manager's message right at the front. It's a nice little summary, not too long. Volume 1 is the operating budget. Volume 2 is the projects budget. And we are scheduled to go to council with a quarterly budget update on October 13th. Next slide. And with that, I will turn it over to Tina.
Good evening. I'm Tina Murphy. I'm the Director of Human Resources. Next slide, please. I'm excited to tell you a little bit about the key services that the Human Resources Department provides to our employees, to applicants for employment, as well as to our residents. The first is benefits administration, and that's predominantly for our current employees, ensuring that they have all the benefits that they need, and we can make changes throughout the year for that. Next is recruitment and classification. That's for applicants for employment, promotional opportunities for our existing city personnel. We also have risk management under human resources that not only includes workers' compensation claims, but also general liability claims that the city attorney had mentioned earlier against the city. So all of those claims come through the risk management division of the Human Resources Department. We have employee relations and employee development, which also includes our volunteers. So the volunteers that are not city employees would also help out with the employee relations and employee development. So that's labor relations, any sort of training and development opportunities for staff. That's handled by the human resources staff. And then we also have an administration division, which is the catch-all for everything else. It doesn't get absorbed in the other 4 divisions. And we also support the personnel board, which is our board and commission for the Human Resources Department, which handles any sort of disciplinary appeals. Next slide, David. So under our employee relations and labor relations framework, we are guided by several laws. The MMBA, or the Myers-Milius-Brown Act, is a state law that governs labor relations in government. The federal law is the National Labor Relations Act, and that handles collective bargaining and employees' right to organize. The city does have 6 bargaining units that we bargain with. They have memorandum of understanding or collective bargaining agreements that you can find on our city's website. And if there's any concern or issues with that, employees have the right, or the unions have the right, to go to the Public Employer Relations Board, or PERB, to file unfair labor practice charges. Thankfully, we don't have too many of those. And our local guidelines, which are available on the city's website, are available through Human Resources, include our city charter, our civil service rules and regulations, our memorandum of understanding, and the city's administrative policies. Okay, next slide. Like I mentioned, we do have 6 bargaining units and a group of unrepresented employees. Our largest bargaining unit, which has 481 employees, is our Sunnyvale Employees Association, or SEA, and that's represented by IFPTE Local 21. There are 481 employees. That's actual people. That's not positions. The position count for those positions are a little bit higher, but I just wanted to give you a picture of the number of employees in each of the bargaining units. Our next group is the Service Employees International Union, or SEIU. They represent our part-time employees. So whereas SEA Local 21 represents our professional, paraprofessional, technical, clerical, maintenance staff, the same type of positions are represented in SEIU, but SEIU only represents part-time employees in those classifications. So there are just 41 employees in part-time positions there. The Communication Officers Association, that's the 15 dispatchers. So when you dial 911, the communications dispatchers, the public safety dispatchers are the ones that pick up the phone and help you in time of need. Our Public Safety Officers Association consists of 190 public safety officers and public safety lieutenants. This also has about 10 represented public safety officers in training. And so they're not quite certified yet to be public safety officers on their own, but they have gone through, or in process of going through, one of the 3 academies that our public safety officers go through, which I'm sure the chief will probably address a little bit later, but all of our public safety officers are trained firefighters, trained police officers, and trained PMTs. So they're emergency medical technicians as well. Our Public Safety Managers Association, those are the 10 managers in public safety. So our public safety captains, as well as our deputy chiefs. We have another group of managers, which is our Sunnyvale Managers Association, which work in all city departments with the exception of the city attorney's office and human resources. And the city attorney's office and human resources managers are part of what we call the unrepresented group. So the unrepresented are those that don't fall under a collective bargaining agreement. There are a number of employees that are classified or unclassified management employees, like the managers in HR and city attorney's office. And there's also a number of unrepresented classified employees, which are like the analyst in the human resources department and some in finance, as well as other departments throughout the city. So the total number of positions with the city are 863 that are filled. And then we do have 929 positions citywide. So like I said, there is a little bit of a higher number of positions. So right now we're at about a 7% vacancy rating. So next slide. Right, just as a little snapshot of what our employees look like throughout the departments. The larger departments are going to be the ones that you have probably seen more out in the field. So our public safety, our public works employees, environmental services, library and recreation, those are the ones that have more employees, and those are more front-facing as well. Next slide. Okay, some major initiatives that HR has going on right now. You heard it from finance, you'll hear it from IT, as well as the city attorneys, our city manager's office, and that's the implementation of our enterprise resource planning program. And we're really excited about that. The HR module will go live next year after finance goes live this year. And we are in the process of kind of integrating more use of technology for onboarding our city employees. We started that in 2018. When I first started, I think I was the first employee that did online enrollments, and now we have a system that we're using to do benefit enrollments for all brand new employees. So we're trying to update our tools and technology and really help the employee experience when they first get hired. One of the other things that HR has been responsible for are wellness and engagement activities, and those initiatives include mental wellness, physical wellness, as well as financial wellness. So that right now there's a cooking class that's going on for some of our employees to be able to cook dinner tonight and learn a little bit more about that. We have financial wellness sessions throughout the time. Prior to COVID, we would do different events that allowed employees to network together, and we're trying to take that more into a virtual environment right now, but we're really trying to reach out to our employees and keep them engaged in the workplace. The other major initiatives that are going on, we have contract negotiations going on this year for one of our bargaining units, and we'll have 3 bargaining units up for negotiations next year. And then anytime we are doing something kind of fun and interesting, we like to advertise that in social media and really try and generate enthusiasm for the jobs that we have and increase our recruitment tools through social media and internships. This year, the internship program didn't get off to a tremendous start, but we did have a couple of interns that were hired in public works and I believe in environmental services. So we did have a couple of things there. All right, next slide, David. Okay, just in terms of our recruitment statistics, last fiscal year, we conducted 85 recruitments. We had over 5,000 applications that were received for those 85 recruitments, and we ended up hiring 151 new hires or promotions and transfers. That is about 10% less than what we had in the prior fiscal year. We did see a decline in the number of recruitments that we were conducting toward the end of the fiscal year after shelter in place was instituted. We did notice casual hires. There was a lot less this past year because the summer programs with recreation were put on pause. We had 39 casual job postings and we hired 143 casual. And the term that we use for our kind of seasonal or part-time or temporary employees is casual. So we had 143 casual hires. And then our turnover rate last year, for those who might be interested, is about 10.5%. Okay, next slide. Okay, the COVID-19 had a big impact on the human resources services that we are providing. Implementation of the COVID-related laws has been tremendous. So that's been kind of exciting to deal with. We did staff the Emergency Volunteer Center, which is the EVC. We put about 800 people to work in different shifts over a series of months at Sunnyvale Community Services. And then we've been transitioning all of our work to a remote environment. Similar to finance, we have a couple of people who come into the office on a regular basis, but for the most part, we've transitioned all of our work to online, which has been really a tremendous attestation to our staff to be able to kind of make that move. Next slide. Okay, thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. My name is Kathleen Boutte Foster. I'm the Chief Information Officer for the Information Technology Department and the city at whole. Next slide, please. So essentially the IT department, we are fortunate. In Sunnyvale, all of IT is centralized within my department. So we manage everything from the infrastructure that people don't see, like networks and security, to things that people use every day now, which is their laptops and their cell phones. We have also applications. We've got about 287 applications citywide that are used, whether that's something like a big system like permitting to something that's smaller. We tend to support all of it with partnership with our departments. So I'm lucky that we can serve every department in the city. In addition to the nuts and bolts of applications and infrastructure, we have a project management office. So every IT project, whether it is a major technology initiative like the ERP you keep hearing about, Enterprise Resource Planning System, or if it's just a small portion of a project that we work on, for instance, like the Washington Pool, where we're doing just a Wi-Fi deployment, those all go through an IT governance model, and then it is actually approved through that governance model, prioritized and funded accordingly. So our IT governance model is phenomenal, one like you don't see in many cities. Every department has at least one representative that sits on the solutions committee, And that committee then gives guidance and does a lot of hard work for policy adjustments, working through priorities for both applications being brought online in a case of an emergency, but also projects to be prioritized. And then that goes to the IT steering group, which is essentially our executive leadership team. It includes the city manager as well as every department head. So all IT initiatives will flow through this governance model and ultimately be approved or prioritized accordingly. So I'm very excited to have that in place, and we are going to be working on an IT strategic plan that will also go through that governance structure. We implement every IT project, whether it's just through project management services or the whole kit and caboodle of providing infrastructure as well as new applications. The cost that we look at for technology, whether it's replacing a piece of hardware or if it's replacing a full system, that gets projected out through a 20-year financial plan that Tim talked about. And every asset we manage citywide. So even down to a little silly little mouse that you might not think of, those become big things if they have to be replaced often. So we manage all of those costs. We also maintain a high level of system availability. We're at a 4 nines, 99.99% of the time we have everything up and running. And we also provide a centralized service. So we have a service desk with staff that man that, and a knowledge base that all city staff can go ahead and search tips and tricks or things that they want to learn about as it relates to technology. Next slide, please. Our major initiatives. You've heard a lot about ERP. But certainly that is the biggest change management, organizational change system that we're going to see this year and in the coming years, quite frankly. It touches pretty much every aspect, and it touches every employee because it includes timekeeping. So it is a big undertaking for the departments. Permitting, that is a partnership, as you heard from Trudy, with CDD as well as Public Works and a little bit of public safety public safety and fire. Essentially, that is going to be taking a homegrown system and making it into a cloud-based system. Our public safety computer-aided dispatch, major partnership and overhaul from public safety, where we're going from our older CAD to a cloud-based CAD as well. And you heard from OCM or the city manager about electronic records management. This is wholesale change from paper to online records. And as part of our requirements, we have server upgrades that need to happen. This is coming and bubbling up to this top of this list only because we have been so far behind based on the fact that we have some older systems that cannot be upgraded or haven't been able to be upgraded. So now we're coming and bringing everything into the current standards. And quite frankly, Microsoft is giving us a no pass for the future. So we are required to upgrade everything, even if we don't want to. We have to at this point. SharePoint is our intranet system as well as a file sharing system that we use. And so we're moving that from an on-premise server into the cloud so that it will allow us to go ahead and share information, especially in times like now where most of our staff are remote. They will be able to have access without needing any special tools or what we call virtual private networks, VPNing into the system to get to things. So we're trying to make it simpler. Next slide, please. So how has COVID impacted us? It has been a major overhaul going from most of the staff working on site in cubicles or in the field to a lot of us working remotely or rotating through our remote services. So my team has provided a lot of additional support and training for people. In some cases, some of the staff members weren't even used to using a laptop. And so trying to get laptops issued as well as training on those things was a big initial push. Then we had a lot of resource constraints, of course, because of COVID slowing some of the things down with project activities needing to slow down. Just the fact that we can't get into a room and do testing together and talk to each other easily. Yes, Zoom works or Teams, Microsoft Teams are great tools, but they don't have that same level of camaraderie and the quickness that we can see when you're just stuck in a room together testing and going through the churn of an implementation with a big system. We've also seen an emphasis on IT security. boy, there's always an opportunity for the hackers to come out, and they are out in flurry right now. So we have increased our training, our IT training for staff to go ahead and understand things about protecting their passwords, not going and being lured through an email phishing attack, or even a hack attack in the sense of what the different things that are coming through. There's even now texting that's going on, that's mock text messages that try to gain information and security. So we've increased our security training. We've also increased our security protocols, and we've made sure that there is pretty much no way for folks to get through unless our employees unfortunately fall prey to it. So far, so good. Our implementation next that we're going to be looking at is temperature tablets. So as we start bringing more of the workforce back on campus, we are going to have the ability for a no-touch temperature tablet that will take employees' temperatures at the suitable level, and then make sure that they can come in without having to hold anything, touch anything, or take their own temperatures with a handheld device. And right now, the majority of my department is working remotely, and we are trying to support all of the others. So the only staff that I have on site is a rotation of the management team, as well as our client services group and our service desk. So it's a big change for the whole city, but a small change for our department. Next slide, please. And with that, I will hand it off to our new library and recreation services, named department, and Charisse.
Hi, everyone. Charisse Brandel, Director of Library and Recreation Services. And as Kathleen just said, just 2 weeks ago, we were Library and Community Services. So we have a new name that hopefully will give us some distinction between what we do and what Sunnyvale Community Services is offering. Our department, as Tina said, has 83 people. We're roughly half and half divided between the library and recreation department. We support 3 different boards or commissions, including the Board of Library Trustees, the Arts Commission, and then we share responsibility for the Parks and Rec Commission with the Public Works Department. The key services that we offer in the library are children's and teens, and adults are 2 of our 4 work groups. Those are mainly the librarians who are responsible for managing our collections and understanding the content of what is available in the library. We have a technology and support services division, which is the department that supports all of the back room, behind the scenes, digital content that we provide and making that work, as well as supporting some of the equipment that we have an automated materials handling system in the library, and they support that machinery and other technical aspects. Our customer services and technical services work group is the largest group in the library, or they're about half of the library staff. And that includes the pages, the people that answer the phone, the folks who take care of returning materials to the shelves, and who do all the actual handling and processing of all of the materials as they come in and go out. And then we're going to be adding a 5th work unit in 2023 when we open the Lakewood Branch Library and Learning Center. Next slide, please, David. The Recreation Division also has 5 work groups. Youth and Teens is our preschool, our after school, our Youth Advisory Committee, our summer camp programming. Sports and Aquatics group that's pretty self-explanatory. The big news there is that we have just added some additional aquatics capacity. Our longtime pool provider at the Fremont High School pool was not able to continue to provide services under COVID, and so their contract is no longer in place, and the city is providing aquatics services ourselves for the first time in about 18 years at that facility. Our Columbia Neighborhood Center work group provides a community school model of wraparound services based at the Columbia Middle School. We provide support after school programs and, as I said, wraparound services, including meal program and food distribution, childcare, and other activities, not just for the Columbia Middle School, but for all of the Title I schools in the Sunnyvale Elementary School District through a partnership that we have with the school district. Our arts, marketing, and customer service work unit does include the management of the theater, all of our visual arts like pottery or painting studio, our art in public places program, the activity guide that we do every season, as well as the website for recreation services and all of our front-facing counter staff. And then we also have a very active senior center and a therapeutic recreation program. Next slide, please, David. Just some statistics to show you the breadth of the services that we're providing. The library is circulating annually about 2 million items between our digital items and our actual physical items. That's a pre-COVID number. About 700,000 annual library visitors. Again, a pre-COVID number, but we are still distributing about 2,000 books every day through our sidewalk services. We have over 50,000 annual library program participants. That's everything from our daily story time, which is very well attended, to adult book groups, to summer reading and all those kinds of things. We've digitally or actual physically provided 5,000 new library cards in the past 12 months. Shelter in place did see an increase in the requests for library cards as people were stuck at home basically and hopefully got tired of watching TV, so they wanted a good book to read. In recreation, we use our facilities almost 200,000 hours every year for programming. Just an example of park use is Baylands Park, which is our most popular park for annual visits at about 30,000. And we've had over 1 million participant hours in recreation programs in a typical non-COVID year. Next slide, David. The major initiatives that we have underway are the design now in partnership with the Public Works Department, design of the Lakewood Branch Library and Learning Center. That's been, they've had a couple of community meetings so far to get input from the community on what that branch library should look like. And we'll be excited to have that come to council for approval late this year or early in the next year. Again, partnership with Public Works, working on designs for Fair Oaks Park, and the Washington Pool that's actually under construction. We're hoping will open up this spring and provide a really amazing recreational pool facility with a splash pad and a zero depth, as well as some lap lanes. With the city manager's office, we're partnering on, you heard Kent mention the Sunnyvale Unity effort. We are also supporting a cultural inclusion study and plan that was a council study issue last year, bringing that to fruition. That includes an inventory of all of the inclusive practices that all of the city's departments are undertaking, as well as a comparison with best practices of cities across the country. And then we'll provide some options for implementation that the council can select from going forward. We're also undertaking a revenue and fee study and cost recovery policy for recreation programs that we'd like to bring to council. We're about to bring to council our final master plan for public art, and we're excited about seeing that go forward. It goes to the Planning Commission on Monday and to the council next month. And then we've also been working on a department mission and strategic plan that we hope would bring together the library and the recreation division so that we are truly reflecting our work as one community building organization. Next slide, please, David. So COVID impacts on library services. We have, once shelter in place was over, and we could have people back in the building. Starting in June, we opened up our sidewalk services. Council approved the library to go fines free in April, and so that helped us through the transition. Availability of digital services has been expanded greatly because of the demand while people were in shelter in place. The library's digital books and movies and music and other databases and resources were all available virtually, so people could still access the library, which meant we did have some people working in the library during the shelter in place as essential workers because we were providing services and answering questions for those digital services. We switched over to a new virtual catalog during the closure and have activated something called LibChat and LibAnswers, which are virtual librarian services. People can speak to a librarian anytime during business hours and get their question answered. And we have had over 100 virtual programs with over 5,000 views during the closure. Next slide, please, David. COVID has also impacted our recreation services, but the senior center, as soon as the shelter in place happened, we were open there providing the city's COVID answer point. We also provided meal and grocery delivery and care management for all of the seniors that were members of our senior center and for other folks that were in need in partnership with Sunnyvale Community Services. We put on a COVID compliant summer camp for almost 200 kids in the community. We're now doing some distance learning pods that are, again, COVID compliant distance learning centers, including one where we're providing distance learning services to the kids from the homeless shelter. We're providing online classes. As I mentioned, we're doing aquatics. Supporting second harvest food distribution. And then we were excited to do hands on the arts and state of the city. Next slide, please, David. And now we'll turn it over to Chris Stadelman for Nova Workforce Services.
Thank you, Charisse. I'm Chris Stadelman. I'm the director of Nova Workforce Services. Next slide, David. We are a federally chartered workforce development board, chartered by the federal government. The legislation is called the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. The funding comes from the Department of Labor, and it's distributed in the state through EDD. There are 500 workforce boards across the country and 45 in the state of California. I will say, next slide, please, David, that there is something unique in Sunnyvale about Nova in that we are the only department that has 100% grant funding, meaning that none of our funding comes directly through the city. It's all through monies that we either get allocated from Congress or we raise ourselves. Sunnyvale serves as the fiscal agent through a joint powers agreement. We're an 8 jurisdiction area. Remember I said there were 45 in California. Well, we're the largest one in Northern California. We cover 7 cities and they're listed there in Northern Santa Clara County and all of San Mateo County. Our purpose really is to help bridge the gap between labor supply and demand. So we tell all of our jurisdictions, what you need to know about us is if you know somebody who's looking for work, you can send them to Nova. And if you know a business who's looking for employees, you can send them to Nova. We operate physically out of 2 job centers, one in Sunnyvale and one in San Mateo County. It's actually in the city of San Mateo, and it is contracted out to a vendor, but they operate as Nova. So the community knows it as a Nova service. The council, the city council in Sunnyvale appoints the board, the workforce board itself. That's by the joint powers agreement that made Sunnyvale the fiscal agent and host of Nova some 35 years ago, clearly in a previous legislation. The board, however, sets the strategic direction and the priorities. At City Council, you will see us bring our annual plan to the council. You approve our budget every year, and you appoint our board members. They do an annual retreat every year where they really set the direction of the programs for the year. And it's all about matching the needs, the moment in the local economy. What we do to help, next slide, David. What we do to help our customers is we provide what we call career navigation services, networking, workshops, career advising, And we do that through phone calls, email, used to be in-person workshops. Now they're all Zoom workshops. We have customized everything, thanks to COVID, to operate online, including eligibility determination, registration. Everything right now is done in a remote setting. Those numbers, the 3,105 customers last year was a small year. Our unemployment rate was under 2%. I'll just refer back to the previous recession, 2008. We served 12,000 customers in 2009. We expect our numbers to grow soon. We are seeing such large layoffs. For example, we had 20,000 people laid off from the San Francisco airport up in San Mateo County. So we're anticipating a big influx of workers or dislocated workers. And what we really do is assess their careers or their skills from their previous jobs and determine what skills match what the labor market is looking for right now. We do have funding to subsidize skill enhancement where that's necessary. We're quite good at what we do, and because of that, we're able to raise funding in excess of our allocation from the federal government by quite a bit. We also act as the regional fiscal lead, thanks to Sunnyvale's great reputation for finance. And so we manage regional funding for both San Francisco and San Jose workforce boards as well. And with that, I will cede the balance of my time to the next two departments.
Hi, everyone. My name is Fan No, and I am the Chief of the Department of Public Safety. I've been a chief here for almost 4 years. Next slide, please. So the Sunnyvale Department of Public Safety is a fully integrated public safety department. We provide police, fire, and EMS services. And we are organized into the 10 programs that are listed. They're very much self-explanatory, with the exception with community preservation services. That particular program, in most of the cities, it would be called code enforcement. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about the major initiatives and projects that are currently underway. And the main theme that you guys will hear tonight is that we don't do it by ourselves. We get a lot of support from the different city departments on these projects. We work a lot with human resources, with IT, and with public works. So the first one I'm going to talk about is the Fire Station Master Plan Study, which Public Works is the lead, and we're working with Public Works. So currently the city has 6 fire stations, with the exception of Station 5. The other 5 stations are about 50 to 60 years old. And so we are working with a consultant to do a life cycle analysis of the 5 older fire stations in our city. We are currently working on the fire apparatus replacement for our fire fleet. And recently we placed 4 new fire engines, and we are in the process of going before council at the next council session to get approval for the purchase of additional 2 fire engines. Next slide, please. We are also working on the building addition to the current headquarters here at Department of Public Safety. And the major portion of this will be a new emergency operations center here at headquarters. In addition to that, we will be remodeling the locker rooms that we have here at headquarters. We will be providing a new investigations office space with this project. And then also we will remodel the main lobby and the property and evidence room at headquarters also. Next slide, please. So as you are all aware, there's been a conversation about police reforms throughout the country. And we in Sunnyvale, we are not immune to that particular conversation. And you know, prior to even these conversations about police reforms, we have been working on improving the processes that we have in our department. And the first one I'm going to talk about is the new internal affairs software program that we are looking to obtain here in our department to track internal affairs investigations in our department. And we will be going before council to seek funding for the software program that will allow us to better track internal affairs investigations. NIBARS, the National Incident-Based Reporting System. Currently, the FBI uses the UCR reporting system, the Uniform Crime Reporting System. That crime reporting system has been around since the 1930s, and beginning of next year, January 1st, 2021, the FBI will transition into the National Incident-Based Reporting System, and it's just a different way of accounting crime reports nationally. And with this particular item, we will be going before council to request for funding to get a software program that will be integrated into a records management system so that we will be able to report out on the new system starting next year. The CAD project, the computer aided dispatch project, the IT director has already covered this, and so I'm not going to repeat what she has said. The listening sessions, just as I mentioned before, there's this conversation about police reforms in our country, and the city has put together several listening sessions here in our city, and it's been really informative hearing from different community members here in our city. The first listening session we had was open to the general public, and anybody could attend to the listening session and provide us feedback on what they're seeing here in our city in terms of public safety, and also make recommendations to the city also. We had a second session that included our youth community here in Sunnyvale, and we had one recently with the LGBTQ community. And this week on Thursday, we will be hosting a public safety roundtable discussion where it's going to be an opportunity for community members to interact with myself and members of my command staff and talk about public safety issues here in our city. Policies and practices link on the city website. This is something new that we are doing. And we have always believed that we are transparent and that we take every opportunity to provide information to members of the public on our policies and practices. And recently we have done that. And so I would highly recommend all of you who have questions or have an interest on policies and practices here at the Sunnyvale Department of Public Safety, please go on our city website. It has a host of information on there. We recently posted information about the internal affairs process. A lot of people have questions about how we hold our officers accountable. We will be posting information on our use of force incidents here at the department. And then we have our entire duty manual, which is called Lexpol, that is posted on the city website also. Another thing that we have posted on the city website is a log of all the drone activities that are conducted by our department. And so lots of good stuff that's on our city website. I encourage you to go on those links if you need to find any information regarding the operations here at the Department of Public Safety. Next slide, please. So the impacts on services with COVID. One of the biggest impacts is, obviously the increased usage of protective equipment for our personnel. And so we had to make sure that we were fully stocked to provide adequate PPE for our sworn officers and our professional staff. And that would include masks, hand sanitizers, gowns, booties, things that are essential for first responders here. Personnel costs, testing and lost time at work. Unfortunately, we've had several exposures of our sworn personnel when they have to deal with people out in the field. When they are exposed, we have to provide them time off so they can get tested. And when they have to take time off, then we have to backfill their positions with overtime. And so that obviously is an additional cost with COVID. Reduced calls for service. One of the main impacts of I would say calls for service is that we're seeing a reduction in calls for service in all areas. In terms of police responses, we saw a 19% reduction. And on the fire side, EMS calls, we saw a 22% reduction. Obviously with shelter in place, that is a given. Next slide, please. Staffing, ongoing activation of the Emergency Operations Center. We currently do a conference call on a weekly basis. When we first started out, we did 2 calls per week, but now that things have kind of settled down a little bit, we have reduced it to 1 call per week with the entire emergency management team. And also the supporting staff, and that consists of about 67 total personnel that would participate on these weekly calls. And so we are looking to reduce the number of participants in these calls, and I think starting tomorrow we will have probably about 10 or 15 people on the call instead of the usual 67 on average that we had in the past. Remote work, alternative working schedule. For us, most of our personnel are first responders working out in the field, working on the fire side and the police side, and so the opportunity to work remotely is not as robust as other city departments. However, we do have professional staff, and we have made accommodations to staff members who can work remotely also. Operational modifications, it's a given. With shelter in place, with COVID, we had to make a lot of modifications to operations, and that's everything. That's changing the way that we do business when we respond to a medical call, reducing some of the things that we would do out in the field when we come in contact with people. Having the main lobby doors closed and people have to basically pick up the phone or use the internet when they come to headquarters for services. We do have personnel here, but we have those procedures in place to make sure that everybody is safe. A reduction in in-person community engagement programs. This is one of the things that makes me the saddest, because our department really believed in engaging with our community members, and traditionally we have a lot of community programs that we engage with our community, but unfortunately with COVID and shelter in place, those things have been drastically reduced. Next slide, please. Some of the programs that I want to talk about that we haven't had a chance to do this year, it's the Youth Leadership Academy, the Public Citizens Public Safety Academy, and the CERT program, where we would normally have 3 CERT sessions per year, but we haven't had one recently because of the shelter in place. So those are some of the examples of some of the programs that unfortunately we weren't able to do recently because of COVID. So I'm looking forward to the day where everything is back to normal and we can go back to engage with our community members in person. But until then, we're working on finding different ways to engage with our community. And that concludes my presentation.
All right. I'll take it over from here. Chip Taylor, I'm the Public Works Director, saved the best for last here, so I'll make it through. If you can move the slide, please. So to talk about public works, we've got a large breadth of services that we do throughout the city and with a lot of the city departments, as you've heard throughout the presentation. We have our transportation network, so everything from striping on the roadways, traffic signs, our traffic signals, preparing our new active transportation plan for bike and pedestrian network. We manage all of those programs and making sure they're all in good working order. Streetlights throughout the city. We have tens of thousands of streetlights throughout the city. Recently changed those over to LED streetlights to reduce energy consumption. So it's been really beneficial. We have our urban forestry, so all of our city street trees, our trees and parks, we have to manage and maintain those. And then we do plant new trees as other trees might die to make sure we do have a robust forest throughout the city. We have our pavement and concrete, so all of our roadways, the actual roadway surface itself with the asphalt. We do kind of a unique treatment in Sunnyvale where we do a chip seal 1 year, which is a little bit rougher treatment, but very structural to the roadway. And then we'll come back with a slurry seal that kind of smooths everything out on top and protects the surface. With that concrete program, as Tim Kirby talked about, we have the sidewalk program, so doing sidewalk repair throughout the city. Land development engineering, this is the one that works really with the community development department and with the building department or building division of community development related to all of our land developments and ensuring all of the engineering requirements are met for all the land developments throughout the city. We have real property management, so we do own several properties throughout the city. We lease some of those. We purchase properties as may be necessary for projects, and we've even sold some properties recently. Parks, open space, and golf. So fairly self-explanatory, but we maintain all of the parks throughout the city and our open space, as well as the 2 golf courses with Sunnyvale Municipal and Sunken Gardens. Fleet maintenance, so all of our entire vehicles within the fleet, from the small vehicles all the way up to the fire engines that the chief talks about. We help to purchase those and maintain all of those vehicles. Facilities management, so all of our facilities, all of our buildings throughout the city, we have to maintain those facilities from kind of our regular maintenance that we have to do, as well as any emergency repairs that need to occur. And then our capital project administration team, it's a fairly small team, but has large budgets because they do all of our large capital projects throughout the city, whether it be a paving project all the way through a large park renovation that we might be doing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. You can advance the slide. On this slide, I won't go into the details or run through the numbers here, but it just gives you a little bit of an idea of kind of the magnitude of things that we have to manage throughout the city. As you can see, there's 38,000 street trees that we're working on, 97 rounds of golf, and 177 acres of park. So just a large variety of things that we have to manage throughout the city. Next slide. So to talk about some of our major initiatives, major projects. So the Civic Center project, which is mentioned by the chief as well, it was a master planning process that went through a large master planning process and ultimately got to a decision with various phases. And the first phase is really to replace the new city hall, replace the existing city hall with a new city hall, also do the Department of Public Safety addition and renovation. And one of the biggest benefits that I see with this project is some of the old buildings that house our Human Resources Department as well as NOVA will be demolished as part of this because they'll be moved into the new City Hall. And all of that land will be given back as open space, at least for a period of time. And so that open space can be utilized by the public, as well as throughout the campus. We're going to have a lot more landscaping that will be much more available to the public to utilize. So it's an exciting project. The bids are out. We'll open bids here in a few weeks, and then we'll award the contract in October and start construction next year. So that's a very exciting project for the city. Next slide, please. One of the biggest projects as far as the amount of money in the city is the Clean Water Program. And really what that is, it's our wastewater treatment plant. And Ramona talked about this a little bit. And it's essentially trying to, we have to keep the airplane flying while we're doing repair work on the airplane. And this went through another big master planning process and ultimately came up with a number of phases. It's a multi-decade project. And a lot of the work will be done over the next, 5 to 10 years. There'll be a lot of work that will be done. And it's replacing things. The current project that's been under construction since 2015 and will be completed next year are kind of the primary components where the wastewater first comes into. So that's kind of the first piece of that. And then we'll start to work through some of the other phases for replacing some of the other components. During the shelter in place, we were able to keep this project moving forward. It was defined as an essential infrastructure project, so it got to continue to move forward. And I talked about the phases, and as you can see, it goes all the way out to 2044. And really, some of the later phases will be more dictated by changes in regulatory environment, or even changes in our wastewater and how much flow we actually get. Next slide. Another project that's currently under construction, Washington Swim Center. I think that a couple directors talked about this as we work with many of the other departments. We had an old swimming pool there that was in desperate need of replacement. It's currently under construction and will be completed in the spring, and hopefully we'll be able to open it up for the next season for next summer. And we were able to keep this moving during the shelter in place. And if you're out at Washington Park, you can walk by this and kind of peek in the fence and whatnot. And you can see the swimming pool's all poured, the buildings are there. So a lot of work has already been done on this, and this will be another exciting project. Next slide. The Matilda Avenue improvements. So Matilda Avenue, as it goes across 101 and 237, kind of a whole mess of various lanes that go through there and access to the freeway. So kind of a multi-year process to get this planned and funded. The city did put up some money, but at the end of the day, this was mostly funded by Measure B, as well as some state funds that came through, really cleaning up the on-ramps and off-ramps, cleaning up Matilda as you go across here, as well as having a continuous sidewalk, continuous bike lane. And there's also, for a portion on Moffett Park Drive, there is essentially a dedicated bike facility that's separate from the roadway. So this project for kind of all modes, one of those multimodal type projects, just recently got completed. Obviously, it's not being utilized as much right now, but the vehicles will come back, and there'll be a virtual ribbon cutting for that very soon. Next slide. Fair Oaks Bridge rehabilitation. So Fair Oaks Bridge, as it kind of goes over the railroad tracks, Caltrain railroad tracks, needed some work, some seismic work to improve its stability, as well as one of the great benefits of this project is to add bike lanes and to add sidewalks on the bridge itself. There was a separate dedicated pedestrian overcrossing that went over the railroad tracks, but it was kind of tucked in the corner, and some people didn't feel quite comfortable utilizing that. With this, it'll be much more open. You can just stay right on the roadway and cross over. And so we just recently started construction on that, and it's been continuing because it's an essential project. And we anticipate the construction will be toward the end of next year. And a lot of the funding for that is also state and federal funding as well. Next slide. So we have also several parks. And these, for me personally and for Public Works, are very exciting to deliver to the public. We have Fair Oaks Park, which we just awarded for construction. And it has a magical bridge playground, which will be an all ages, all abilities playground, or where we partner with Magical Bridge related to that. So that will be something that will be new to Sunnyvale, as well as fairly new to the area. And so the construction completion for that will be about fall of 2021. And it will also have synthetic turf, which will also be new to Sunnyvale. At the old AMD property, where they're currently under construction for some residential properties, as part of that overall project, they dedicated 6.5 acres to the city for a brand new park that did not exist before. And so that project is currently moving its way through design. The council has approved the conceptual design for that. It's fully funded. And then the final design will be coming back sometime spring of next year. And then that'll go out for construction as well and completed in 2022. So that'll be a completely brand new park adding to our acreage within the city. And then Lakewood Park is also up for renovation. We're just going to begin the process here shortly to renovate Lakewood Park. It will also have an all-inclusive playground component to it. We received a grant from the county to add that into the project, along with the city funding that was already dedicated. So that'll be another addition to the city as well. Next slide. And my last slide here, talk about the COVID-19 impacts. So reduced golf revenue was one of the big ones for us, as both of our golf courses were shut down for a period of time. Surprisingly, now that they can reopen, they tend to be one of the sports that a lot of people have been gravitating to because you can socially distance fairly easily. So that's been something that's actually been exciting because golf's been kind of in decline over the years. So bringing people back into that, maybe that they'll stick with it even after this is all done. And then our city playgrounds have been closed for a long period of time. So because of COVID, with the new health orders, we can start to open those back up with certain signage that needs to be there to educate the public on how to use the equipment and sanitize before and after. We just recently opened up 4 of our playgrounds that you see listed there. We're doing that as a pilot to kind of see if everybody follows the rules and how it all works. And so hopefully if that's successful, we'll be able to open up the rest of the playgrounds within the city. And then initially, we only brought back about half of our field crews. Most of our staff that worked at City Hall were able to come back virtually, but our field crews initially weren't able to come back, except for mostly the parks folks who were working at the parks and mowing lawns and emptying trash. So that was fairly, they were able to come back, but our field crew, the other field crews were not. They're all back now. They've been back for a while, and they're doing all of the typical work that they do following the regulations. So with that, I'll hand it over to our city manager, Kent Steffens.
All right, thank you, and thank all the directors for presenting. They're all going to stay with us here to be able to answer questions. If I could get the next slide, please, David. I wanted to give you all of our email contacts. This is all of the presenters tonight. Although we missed John Nagel. He should be on here too. David, we talked about how we can make the presentation available to candidates if they want to get a copy. Can you briefly talk about how we're going to make that happen?
Yes, after the orientation's over tonight, I'm going to send an email to all the council candidates with a link to the presentation as well as the recording of tonight's orientation.
Okay, thank you. Before we jump into questions, we are going to sort of go round robin, and if you have a question, if the candidates just use your raise your hand feature on Zoom, we'll go one by one and we'll just keep going until you guys run out of questions. Before we get to that, I know that one of the candidates, Paul, you were having audio trouble and we did self-introductions, and so I wanted to give you an opportunity to just introduce yourself before we get started.
Hi everyone, my name is Paul Joseph Lacivic Campos. I'm one of the candidates for District 4.
Thank you for joining us, Paul. So at this point, we are ready to take any questions you have. This is your chance. You can ask us anything. We'll try our best to answer. If we need to come back with answers, we can do that as well. But if any of the candidates, if you want to raise your hand, we'll just start cycling through any questions that you have. I know we covered a lot of material, and we definitely scratched the surface, but I think you'd probably walk away with an impression that there's a lot of different activities that go on at the city every day. A lot happens behind the scenes, and there's a lot of interesting stuff to work on here. So I want to thank all the candidates for joining us. and for, making yourselves available as candidates. I know that's a lot of effort, so we appreciate the fact that you're trying to run for city council. So at this point, I don't see any questions, but come on, you guys got to have some questions. Okay, Leah, why don't you go first?
I had to get that sneeze out of the way first before I proceeded. So there was a lot of stuff here. First of all, I want to thank everybody who did this presentation, and I'm actually looking forward to going over some of the slide deck again so I can refresh my brain from all the information I have to absorb. But I kind of have a couple questions. I mean, with respect to finance, given the impact of COVID on the city budgets, I guess it would also apply to operations as well. Do we have sort of a disaster strategy in mind for, because it's not just the rest of this year, but it's going to kind of carry on for, the shortfall. I don't know if the shortfall can ever be made up in future years. So I'm wondering if there's some sort of strategy, if they're in the development, is there some kind of strategy surrounding that? And I realize the disaster is ongoing at this point, so that, it might be early days to mention it.
Yeah, I'll say that this is where I think financial planning in Sunnyvale is the strongest and really helps us out with robust reserves. So to your point, we were very cautious about our revenue projections. So we took a pretty big hit in this first year and don't anticipate it coming back in the next couple of years. We're stepping it back, but not coming back all the way. And your point on the structural change is good. We're going to have to monitor that. We anticipate something similar, right? So a simple example is a lot of our hotel taxes came from business travel, where it's not clear that we're going to see that business travel return to pre-COVID levels. So we'll have to watch that closely. And the nature of buying things is changing our sales tax base. So we do have some of that projected in the long term, and we really moderate it. But this is where we use our reserves to give us time to make adjustments and be reactive to the changing environment.
So I'll just add a little bit to that. When the city council adopted the budget this year, and Tim mentioned this, but I'll just give you a couple real life examples. We had to reduce expenses, and seeing the reduced revenue, it's a combination of things we did to reduce expenses, use some reserves, and also we did some shifts in how we budget for things that helped us longer term. But probably the best example where we got some of the most savings, we've frozen vacant positions. So instead, when there was a vacancy, instead of hiring new staff, we've kept those positions vacant. To do the 20-year financial plan, we made assumptions about, with that, in some cases it was as short as 6 months, in other cases it was 2 years. As we get new financial data and we see, has the economy recovered the way we expected? Is it faster? Is it slower? We could make adjustments to that plan and the number of staff. And so, the other thing we did, and I think this was mentioned, a lot of we do hire a lot of part-time summer staff. And so whether it's, lifeguards for aquatics or help for parks, because we have so many picnics, well, that stuff really didn't happen this year. And so we didn't hire temporary staff. And so we have a lot of savings. We also have reduced revenue though, because recreation classes that weren't held, well, they bring in money. And so we didn't hire all the staff to run them, but we also reduced revenue. And so there's quite a few strategies that were employed. As Tim mentioned, if you read the city manager's summary of the budget, it's the first 10 or 15 pages. A lot of that will be explained as a pretty good source to find out what we did. And the key now is for us to stay on top of our financial data and to continue to adjust to make sure we're in line with the revenue that comes in.
And my feeling is even when the emergency situation resolves itself, it's not like all that revenue stream is going to come roaring back. There will be a lag before it resumes, mostly because of the downstream effects from the closure on various small businesses, on other revenue sources, on all the people that have been furloughed or whatever, getting back into actual employment, that kind of thing. And so, I mean, are you projecting different timelines for that kind of lag and trying to anticipate that kind of activity? It's like, I know that projections from like economists at the federal level are now saying that it could be like 3 to 5 years before there is an actual recovery overall, once the emergency is over.
Yeah, we have, and the one slide that Tim showed that showed those two bar graphs next to each other showed what the budget looked like before it was adopted, and then what the budget and revenues look like this year. And essentially, our projection were it's going to take 4 years until revenues sort of get back to normal levels.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be faster or slower, and every different revenue stream kind of has a different story behind it as to whether it returns quickly or more slowly. And so I think the key to our future budget is we need to be flexible and really understand what actuals are versus our projections, because there's no crystal ball that we had when we put the budget together this year.
Yeah, and I realize it's a completely predictive model. It's not, it's like weather. You have to have the actual data to make a more accurate prediction, and we don't have that yet.
Correct. Russ, you had your hand up. You want to ask the next question?
Sure, Kent. And first, I just wanted to say thank you, Kent, City Attorney, Department Directors, and everybody who pulled together this very informative session. I think, Kent, one of the hallmarks of good governance in Sunnyvale is our study issue process. And I was just wondering if you could give a summary of what that is and how it fits into the overall strategy and budget process in Sunnyvale. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that question, Russ. The study session process, I'll say, is infamous in Sunnyvale. I really do think it's one of our best management tools. It's been used for many, many years in Sunnyvale. And in fact, Tuesday, we had a guest for the council meeting who was Ron Gonzalez, who was both mayor of San Jose and mayor of Sunnyvale quite a few years ago. And I think someone was talking to Ron before the meeting. He's like, oh yeah, I remember the study issues that we argued about when I was on the city council. And so it's been around for many years. I think it's served us really well. But the study issue process, and for those candidates that are commissioners, you'll be more familiar with it. Any major initiatives to change policy, typically many of them start as study issues. And it is essentially a proposal to say, let's look at changing a policy, start a new program, and then it goes on to a list. And once a year, the city council prioritizes that list, and leading up into that workshop, and it's an all-day workshop, all of our boards and commissions have an opportunity to submit their ideas for what the city should look at as policy changes. And then the city council ranks those. And inevitably, as you can imagine, there's a lot of good ideas to do studies, and there's never enough that we can't do them all in any given year. Some require a budget allocation. And so in some cases, it takes detailed legal analysis, or it takes an engineering analysis if the study was, let's change a roadway to improve traffic. And so once a year, the council does rank the study issues that have come forward. And then ultimately, we use those. Once the council ranks, then as the city manager, I have to actually then assess how much capacity is there on staff, given other projects, given other programs, to devote to study issues. And I do what's called drawing the line, meaning ones that we have capacity to do, we do. Ones that we don't have capacity to do would come back the following year. Another part of that is if it does require a budget, then it's put in the proposed budget, and City Council would vote at their May budget workshop whether or not to include it, as they think about what are all the other financial needs that we have as a city, how are we doing with revenues. And so it's a very deliberate process that Sunnyvale's used for many years to be thoughtful and be sure that as new policies come forward, there's a very regimented process for how we select those to make sure we do a thorough job and understand the financial impacts before we move forward. Other questions from candidates? I don't see other hands up now, so we're happy to take other questions at this point from anybody.
If I may ask, with respect to the water treatment plant and the smart station, given the anticipated future impacts of global warming on our area, even though we're doing our best to try and mitigate that kind of thing, given the location, adjacent to the bay of the sewage, of the water treatment plant, has there been any anticipation? Has there been any specific studies, like of a worst case scenario, for instance, of the impact of global warming on the water treatment facilities that have looked at, like, what we might have to do if we suddenly had a loss of land in that area due to, like, sea level rise?
Rana, you want to take that?
And I'm sorry for the ums and ahs and the long question there. I was just trying to figure out how to phrase it. It's like, so have we thought about what will happen to our, wastewater treatment plant in the event of a catastrophic global warming event?
Well, that's a great question.
Yeah.
As part of the wastewater treatment plant upgrade, one of the things that we're doing is building a wall to protect the wastewater treatment from what we call the 100-year flood, which is basically, if you have a storm event, you can have any amount of rain, and a 100-year flood is something that has a 1% chance of happening. So it's kind of our worst case scenario as it relates to flooding.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something that's underway. We built portions of the wall as part of the current phase, and then by another 5 years, when we build the second phase, we'll complete the remaining portions of the wall. So that's one aspect of how we are protecting against flooding and impacts of sea level rise. Basically, the big impact of climate change is sea level rise. Mm-hmm. So the sea is essentially rising and is expected to rise anywhere from 3 to 5 feet over the next 100 years. The way we are working on that aspect is that we're working with Valley Water, which is really the regional agency, especially for Santa Clara County as far as flood protection goes. So we're working with them, the U.S. Corps of Engineers, a lot of other agencies like U.S. Fish and Wildlife, to do a study that looks at the shoreline from San Jose all the way to Palo Alto. So the entire shoreline is basically is being studied as it relates to sea level rise. A portion of that has already been funded through the feds on the San Jose side. And then the next phase is the one that a feasibility study is actually being done on the Palo Alto side, and ours is starting in 2022. So as part of the whole process, our goal is to protect the entire shoreline from sea level rise. So on that, hopefully we'll also protect the smart station. So work is underway.
One other thing I'll mention, and I think the candidates will be interested in this. Trudy mentioned the Moffett Park specific plan study that's underway, and yes, we are planning a series of community workshops to both educate the community and talk about potential land use changes in Moffett Park. And of course, the Smart Station and plant are right there next to the study area. So one of our first community workshops is going to focus on sea level rise. And so it's a good opportunity to learn more about the issues, how it might affect that area, what we can do about it, and just inform the community and the council about issues and how it might affect land uses in that area. So we are putting together an outreach plan that'll go to council September 29th, Trudy.
That's correct, next week.
And so then I don't know if we have exact dates yet for the workshop, but we are going to lay that that outreach plan for council feedback next week. Other questions from any of the candidates? You guys are good. I'm going to have to start asking questions of the directors. I'd be tempted, but because I know they'll know the answers.
So I was going to say I have a lot of background in electronic data systems in terms of, like trial master file systems and computer system validations and all this kind of stuff for the thing. So when you were talking about the changes that were being made coming up, is like I had flashbacks to my current job, especially because, in the pharmaceutical industry, electronic record keeping is a big thing, and there's been a lot of growing pains in there. So but not that I'm volunteering to write validation scripts.
I certainly wouldn't want to put you through PTSD by any means, but
No.
certainly that's part of what this community of departments is. Honestly, they really are well at organizational change and doing a phenomenal job of trying to get the staff in our communities ready for everything that's about to really evolve, quite frankly, all these systems. And as you probably know, it is a council priority to use and change and improve processes through technology. And you heard a lot of that tonight, and we are just embracing that full force. So I'm happy. Job security for me at the moment.
What about things like electronic document review and approval, that kind of thing? I mean, is that going to be implemented in the future? Or
yes,
is it?
We actually, in fact, as part of the permitting system project, we just started to implement Bluebeam for electronic plan check and review. So our actual construction plans and other plans are being looked at now electronically. And as part of the ERM project, I know that there'll be other document workflows that go through electronically rather than paper-based. So absolutely.
Right.
Just to add to that, we adopted DocuSign, a couple of years ago. So we've been using DocuSign for city documents to route and sign internally. We're using Adobe Sign now too. I get to sign a lot of stuff. That is one of my jobs I didn't mention at the beginning. But one of the things is that by adopting some of those technologies before COVID hit, I'd say we were very ready. And even though we didn't necessarily see it coming, we were able to transition really fairly easily into a virtual world because we had some of those things in place. And so a lot of hard work's been done for several years to get our IT systems updated. We have more work to do, but it's really put us in a good position to manage through this emergency.
Yeah, I'm not that fond of Adobe Sign, I'll admit, because I don't think it's as robustly compliant for GXP purposes, but that's just my opinion.
Yeah, the majority of our signatures go through DocuSign for especially contracts and other official documents.
Right. Where you need that audit trail.
Yep.
Other questions from any of the candidates? Okay, well, I'm not gonna, I know your time is valuable. I'm not gonna drag it out. So unless there's other questions and I don't see any, we're gonna call it a wrap. I do really appreciate all the candidates joining us this evening. You are gonna get an email from David Carnahan with copies of the presentation materials. Within that, you have our contact information. If you do have questions that come up during this election cycle, you can reach out to me or any of the directors with questions and we'll follow up with you. So again, I want to thank all the directors and all the candidates that joined us tonight. All right, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.